Hello. This is Master GRE 2025 on YouTube. For this next video, I want to talk about general exam strategies, tips, tactics, and especially timing for the GRE. So this isn't so much focusing on individual question types like last time, but generally how you should approach this exam itself. So just a reminder from the first video I had about the structure of the GRE. So writing is always first, and it's 30 minutes long for one essay. And the verbal and quantitative are each 2 sections. They're both 12 questions for the first section. And the second section is 15 questions for both. So all in all, the test is fairly short. You don't have that many questions to do, just 27 each. But more importantly than that, verbal, you have 18 minutes or so for the first section. You have only about 21 minutes for the first quant, 23 minutes for the second verbal, and 26 minutes for the second quant. All in all, the whole exam is roughly about 2 hours, maybe a little more, maybe 2.5 if you have breaks and everything else that goes into the exam, but the test is really not that long. So what's nice about that is that the GRE really won't be too exhausting. It'll be an intense exam, but it won't take too long. You'll be done within 2 hours, 2.5 hours. You can continue and do the rest of your day. The problem for us then is how short the test is. If you look at 18 minutes versus 12 questions, that means on average. So on average, there's roughly 90 seconds per question. Okay. 90 seconds for every question. So that's a bit intense if you really think about it. But honestly, timing is really the last step of studying for the GRE. It's usually what I recommend people do last. It is the hardest part. But like any sport or music, if anyone here plays music, you generally know that tempo or timing tends to be, or speed tends to be the last thing you work on when honing a skill. You make sure you master it at a very slow pace first, and then you move on to speed. Same thing with especially music. You practice something, slowly make sure you get the notes down, maybe even memorizing them, and then once that is done, you move on to actual speed. So that's what you really should be doing on the GRE. Only the last few steps you should worry about have to deal with timing. I would much rather you be the kind of student who studies and masters the entire exam and then focuses on timing rather than trying to get timing down at first. It's going to be really intense as you're just learning the questions to try and master this exam. It would be much more worth your time and a better use of your time to just learn the test first, take your time, even if it takes you double the amount of time than normal to get every question right. Make sure you can get every question right first and then worry about speed. Okay, so speed is important. Timing definitely does matter. It tends to be an issue for a lot of people, but you want to do that last. Now, how do we handle timing then? Because 90 seconds really isn't a lot. Well, it really comes down to how they grade things on the GRE. So this is fairly important here. Every question is worth the same. Okay? Every question's worth the same value. The easiest plug and chug math question is worth just as much as the hardest permutation question. The hardest passage or vocab question you've ever seen is worth exactly the same amount as the hardest story, okay? So you can really take advantage of timing here, where let's say you look at a vocab question, it's super easy, you solve it in 5 to 10 seconds, maybe a little less than 30 seconds. This is just on average 90 seconds per question. So if you finish a minute early on 3 or so questions, if they're really easy, that's an extra 3 minutes you can put on another question. It's generally how all exams go, but on an exam that's this short, that extra time really makes a difference. Okay, so what do I mean by every question's worth the same? So on this exam, you either get 0 points or 1 point. Okay, 1 point. It's binary. There is no, because I had a 3-part vocab question, versus a 1-part vocab question. If I get, maybe all 3 of these correct, I'll get 3 points. But if I get a normal 1 blank vocab question, that'll be worth 1 point. Nope. They're all worth the same amount. So if you do a triple vocab that's super intense, great. It'd be awesome if you got that right, but it's worth exactly the same amount as that first number 1 vocab question you might not have thought a lot about when you first started. You're just trying to blitz through the exam, get through this as quickly as possible, but that number 1 you didn't spend much time considering, and you might have accidentally gotten wrong on a silly mistake, is worth just as much as the hardest one. Okay. Every question demands a certain level of respect so you can get it right. But that's the sad thing, is that no matter how hard a question is, we'd like it to be more valuable because we spent more time on it. But honestly, they're all worth the same. So really the best tactic you can use here is skipping questions and then coming back to them. So because every question's worth the same, really going down to main tactics here, time is short. Okay. Time is short. So what you need to do, the best use of your time moving forward in questions, is to skip a question if it's extremely difficult at first. You should certainly give it a shot. There's never a time where you shouldn't try a question, but you should give it a shot, and then somewhere around 90 seconds or so, at most, just move on if it's really hard. So I'll give my exam as a reference. So I took the GRE a multitude of times throughout the years, but when I had to take it to go to school, it was out of 20 questions. So I was really good at the quant, but even on the quant section, so old GRE, which is out of 20. I would usually, in my 30 to 35 minutes of time, I'd get through 15 or so of the questions and skip 5. Why did I skip 5? It wasn't because I necessarily didn't know how to do them. I just didn't want to waste my time in the moment sitting there trying to figure that out. I knew I would have, if I was stuck on number 10 or something, I didn't want to sit there for 3 or 4 minutes just to get number 10 right. Now I'm rushing through the rest of the test. So I would skip it and come back. So I'd usually have 5 left over or something, but they weren't 5 I was necessarily didn't know. I just didn't want to waste the time in the moment. So now that I've got these 5 left over, I can go back. I understand that, all right, I've definitely got 15 or so in my back pocket. That feels great. I've got 75% of the test done, or at least the section. And then I can focus on those 5 that are either longer or a bit more difficult. Okay. So the tactic I really recommend anyone do on this test, you might already do a variant of this on the GRE, but when your test starts on your whiteboard or your scratch paper, what I really suggest is very quickly just write out all of your questions in a little row or column over on the side, like this. You can even put the time you have left, but honestly, there's already a timer on screen, so you really don't have to worry about it. So let's assume this is the quant section. I have about 21 minutes on my first quant section for 12 questions. And what you want to use this as a reference for how far along the section you are and to keep track of the exam. So let's say number 1 was very easy for me. I cross it off as I finish number 1. If I move on to number 2, Let's say that one's also pretty easy, so I'm starting off strong. But then let's say number 3, for some reason, ends up being a lot harder than I expect. Maybe there's a trick to it or something. I remembered I studied this, but I was somehow on the day of the exam. I'm a bit uncertain about it. I wish I could go back to that day when it was more clear, but for some reason today it's not working. So I think I solved it, but I'm really iffy on it. So here I would just circle number 3. I'm not going to cross it off. I'm going to circle it because I know I have to come back to it. But I'll still move on. So, it's been more than 90 seconds. I really don't want to waste time. I still have so many questions to do. So I'll circle it. I know I'm going to come back and then just move on to number 4. So let's say number 4 is good. I can cross that off. Number 5 isn't too bad. But then let's say for some reason number 6 is another one that maybe it's a concept I'm able to solve, but I don't like the way I solved it, or the first answer that I got was not one of the answer choices. So I put something that was kind of close. So it's, again, another answer I'm pretty iffy on. And then let's say it gets even worse. Let's say on number 7, I have absolutely no idea what's going on or how to do this. Okay. That can happen. Honestly, it would be silly to think that won't happen at all on your exam. If you study everything, it can still happen when during the exam, just in the rush of things, there's a concept that eludes you. And maybe not the entire test. You can always go back to a question, but at least at first it eludes you. So let's say 7, I have no idea how to do. I'm just going to skip it. I'm not going to circle it. I'm not going to cross it off. I'm going to skip 7 like I haven't touched it at all. So I know that's a serious one to come back to. So after that, let's say 8's not too bad. 9 and 10 are tables, so I really get through those, which isn't too bad. And then let's say 11 is another really hard one, kind of like 7. I have no idea how to do. So I try it. After about 90 seconds or so, I move on. So I go on to 12 and I finish that. Okay. So I'll try and make this like a worst case scenario. So let's say I have less than 5 minutes left now. A lot of people, I think, on the test have been here before where, there's less than 5 minutes. I still have so many questions left. What am I supposed to do? Well, the reason I like skipping questions and coming back to them is because one, you've already seen them, so you know how difficult they are. But then 2, you honestly can also make a tier list of the questions you've seen based on difficulty. So let's say, for instance, I got 5 minutes left. I have 4 questions, and I know they're hard questions. So let's say, honestly, this is a worst case scenario. I know I can't finish this section at this point, but I can do my best. I can turn a pretty bad situation into something pretty positive. So what I need to do is, after I've seen all these questions, I need to make a tier list based on how hard these are. So let's say, for instance, I went through this whole test. I remember I circled 6, but 6 really didn't seem all that hard. It was just like a minor mistake or something on my part. So I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to go back to 6 first because I know it's pretty easy. And maybe the same for 3. Since I've been moving on, I've occasionally thought back to 3 and then realized, it's probably a pretty simple question as well. So I'm going to go back to 3 second. Then there's 7 and 11. And 11 looked really hard, but honestly, I just wanted to finish the test first and then I could go back to it. So maybe I'll make 11 the next question. And let's say 7 was just impossible. I really thought that was going to be a struggle. So I'll do 7 last. Okay, but it's good to tier things based on how hard they are. Get the easy ones that you skipped out of the way first, or at least the easier ones, and then save the hardest for last. The reason you don't want to do the hardest ones first is because if you know they're really hard, you don't want to spend several minutes on a question you're going to get wrong anyway, or at least more likely to get wrong. Spend it on a question you know you can still get right. Why focus on the easy ones rather than the hard ones? Because every question's worth the same. Remember, every question's either a 1 or a 0. It's binary. But then on top of that, there's nothing worth more than another. I know it feels like, I work really hard on a question. This one's got to be worth more. Like a combination certainly has got to be worth more than like a table question. But that's just not how this exam works. Everything's worth the same. So there's no point in spending more time on a question if you're just going to get it wrong. So I definitely recommend leaving the hardest ones last. And so I've got 5 minutes left for 4 questions. Let's just say I do 6. And 6 was actually really simple compared to what I thought it was going to be. And 3 as well. Those were quick fixes. And let's say I've got, less than 3 minutes or 2 minutes left now for these last 2. So I'm going to spend all that time on number 11. Turns out it was pretty hard, but I knew I could do it with some extra time. So I'm able to get 11. I guessed on 7. Wasn't able to get to it. But here, that means I was able to have, 11 out of 12 of the answers to be pretty solid. I solved them. I got decent answers I felt confident in on most of the questions and really only had to guess on one. So, running out of time and having so many questions with only 5 minutes left is not a good scenario. That's sort of a last case or worst case scenario. You don't really want to do that. But even if you get into that scenario, you can turn a bad situation into something that's pretty redeemable, okay? So I highly recommend this method. You can do any variant that you like. The actual exam has this like mark system. So you can actually mark a question. It's in like the top right corner. It'll either be like a bookmark symbol or like a flag. But it lets you flag a question on screen, and it makes a little marker so you can always come back to that question and know it's something that you need to return to. So they have a system like this on the GRE exam itself, but I prefer having it written out so you can see your full progress in one quick glance. And so you don't really lose track of anything, okay? So there is a mark button on the GRE to be able to handle this, but I highly recommend writing this stuff out yourself, okay? So very generally for the exam, remember, it's a short test, but because it's short, it's very quick. You have about 90 seconds per question. It's not a lot of time. Really, think about this first verbal question. 18 minutes for 12 questions, and you have to read stories. Okay, so that's a lot. So every question's worth the same, though, and because of that, you really should be marking your questions and skipping the really hard ones, because this is not a test about getting the hardest ones right. This is just a test about you want, and this is something really to write out, you just want to get as many points as possible. Okay. You just want to get as many points as possible. And you saw that with the example I did over here. When they grade this test, it's entirely algorithmic. It's entirely like fill in the blank. It auto grades. Nobody cares about how impressive it is if you only got the hard ones versus the easy ones. If there are 10 easy questions and you get all of them right, that's all they care about. They don't weight them differently once you're inside of a section. In another video, we talked about the difference between hard and easy sections. Those overall are graded differently, but inside of a section, no question's worth more than another, okay? So it doesn't matter if I run into a really hard question and it's number 7 or something. I'm not going to sit there and stew on it. I just want to get as many points as possible. And to give you another example, I ask this to students all the time. So on the quant section, the hardest question is usually in the middle. Okay. Now, why is it in the middle? It's for a pretty nefarious reason. They want to slow you down and hope you run out of time. Okay. So let's assume I did 1 through 6, and they're all good on the quant section. Then I get to number 7. And 7, like I guessed before, was really impossible. Now, you still have 8 through 12 to do. Do you want to sit here and spend the next 5 minutes trying to get number 7 correct? And some people are really, I used to be this way. If you're really wired that way, you really want to get it done in order. Or do you want to move on? So the question I always ask students is, if I could promise you right now, I give you 2 options. You can either only get number 7 right and everything else wrong, or I can offer to give you 8 through 12 correct, but you will get 7 wrong. Which will you pick? You're gonna really hop on that second option. You're gonna say, you know what? I'm just gonna take 8 through 12 correct and screw number 7. I'm gonna get it wrong. That's how you should really be handling this test. That's what I mean by when you skip it. You can always come back to it later, but it's simply not worth it. A lot of us aren't wired that way. We really want to handle it very, in order, very systematically. It doesn't feel good to leave things left behind. But honestly, working on number 7 when you still have 8 through 12 is very nerve-wracking. you're sitting there like, oh my God, I've still got, all these questions left. I'm running out of time. What am I going to do? That is very different than if you come back to number 7, but you're like, oh, you know what? 8 through 12 are done. 1 through 6 is done. Everything else on this test is good. I've just got this last question. I can do this. That's very different than, oh my God, I've still got all this work left to do. If you're constantly worried about all the questions you still have to do, that's going to make doing the question a lot more anxiety inducing, a lot more nerve wracking, and you're going to be less likely to keep a cool head doing a hard question. That's another reason you want to save the hardest for last. Do the hardest last. Q's last. Because you are calmer since everything is done. You just feel better. You feel more reassured that the rest of the test is done. Again, if I said you could get number 7 right, but you're going to get 8 through 12 wrong, how does that feel? Well, okay, now I got number 7 right, but at what cost? And that's what most people do. They don't realize they're making this deal, but when they spend like 5 to 10 minutes on one question, you're just sacrificing the rest of the test. So it's simply not worth it. So please keep that in mind. Okay, so skip the tough questions. You can always come back to them. It's not worth it. And the same, like this is a tactic you can actually draw out to figure it out. You want to get as many points as possible. So here's a general structure of the test again, in terms of length. How can I actually measure this while I'm taking the test? How do I handle hard questions? Why should I skip hard questions? Why is that psychologically better to skip them? So now the last real thing I need to show you in terms of general tactics for the exam is how you can practice this. So remember, the GRE timing is really the last thing you should do, but how do you practice timing? So time. There's 2 ways you can do it. You can go like a soft timer, as I call it, or a hard timer. So a soft timer is probably what you want to do at first. This is if you have a stopwatch on the computer or phone, computer or phone, and you time yourself for a whole section, or for each question. You can try each question for 90 seconds, so it's either for the section or per question. But the point is, after you finish a section, let's say you run out of time for a soft timer, the point is you want to basically, you don't want to stop. So if you run out of time, I guess I'll put it down here. If you run out of time, run out of time, don't stop. The point is, that's what the soft timer is. You've run out of time, but that shouldn't stop you from finishing the question. Keep going, and then the point is, find out how much time you've gone over, and then know, okay, that's how much extra I have. So let's say you had a soft timer, you hit 18 minutes on your first verbal section, but then you realized, oh, I finished this section with +3 extra minutes. So soft timer is really good at letting you take your time to make sure you can still solve questions, but then you know how much extra time you went over and you need to cut out time somewhere, okay? The same thing can be done with whole sections and individual questions. So if you take a question and it's 90 seconds plus 30 seconds Then you know, okay, on this style of question, maybe I'm much worse at time. It takes me a lot longer to finish a certain type of question versus another, and so on. A hard timer means when 18 minutes is up, it's done. So 18 minutes, like a full section is done, you stop, okay? So that is testing as close to the exam as possible. I've got 18 minutes, I've got 21 minutes, whatever the section length is worth, and you stop once that's done. Or 90-second intervals, you are done after it's finished. So that's a lot harder. That one is really focused on timing. It's not really focused on whether you're going to get it right or wrong anymore. It's just to see how much you can get done within the time interval. I generally recommend at the beginning, begin with this and end with the hard timer. Okay, when you're really close to the exam, switch to a hard timer, but at the beginning, when you're still trying to learn things, but if you really want to know how your timing is going, you can start with the soft timer, okay? Soft timers are super important because they teach you your weaknesses based on how long things take, not just if you get them right or wrong. So I can tell you, for instance, most people run out of time on the verbal section because they spend way too much time on vocab and not enough time on passages. On my vocab guide video, I told everybody that one of the biggest things people do is they just sit there and they stare at vocab they don't know. And then instead of 90 seconds on a vocab question, they're spending like 2 or 3 minutes. And you're taking that 2 or 3 minutes away from a passage question that you really need that time. Okay, an extra minute, right? If I give you 5 minutes for a vocab question versus 2 minutes, it's really not going to make that much of a difference. But if I give you 5 minutes versus 2 minutes for a passage question, it'll make all of the difference. Okay, so these timers are really the way to practice to figure out whether you're actually spending too much time on a question. I've had people do soft timers and they realize, oh my God, when I don't know vocab, I'm really spending like 3 minutes on a question. I had no idea it was that bad. Well, this is a way for you to inform yourself. Okay, and to start early. Soft timers, you can start really early on in the process because they're very docile. If you realize you're going 5 minutes over a section, but you still have 3 months to practice the GRE, a soft timer is a nice way to just remind yourself, okay, eventually I'm going to have to speed things up. Hard timers are also a really good alternative for when you're only a couple weeks out or like a week out from your exam, just to see how you handle timing. Because timing is really the way, what I tell students is it's like the final moment before you're done studying where you really have to start juggling everything together. So it's not just that you've learned everything from the verbal and the quant and how to do the passages or the writing passages. It's not about just putting all of that together. It's putting all of that together and doing it at a certain time. So it's really like finally being able to juggle everything. Can you bring it all together and do it in a certain amount of time, which is very tricky. Okay. So here are some methods on how to handle timing on the exam. And up here is how to handle, during the test to break things down so you're not wasting time. Because again, the most important thing to remind you, I had it up here, every question is worth the same amount. That's the number one thing to keep in mind when you're taking the GRE because it is a short test. Every question is worth the same. So spending your time wisely and knowing how to strategize questions that you're going to get right or wrong and focusing on which ones to handle when you have extra time is a lot more important, okay? You want to just get as many points as possible. If I told you right now, listen, I can guarantee you will get 75% of all questions right. I can't tell you which ones they will be, but I can give you 75% of questions. 99% of you would probably say yes to that because that means you're going to get into the 160s on the verbal and like close to 160 on the quant. Maybe like a 159 or something like that, but very close. It's not about which questions you get right. It's just about getting enough of them, okay? So this will be I just wanted this to be a general guide of how to handle timing, certain tactics for taking the exam. I really wanted to keep it general here, really focused more than anything on timing. If you have any questions, again, you can reach me at mastergre2025@gmail.com. Hopefully this was a helpful video. Again, a more general one compared to the last few where I really went into the thick of things. Because the other side of this test is it's not just about mastering the questions, but you got to master the test itself, which includes pretty harsh timing conditions. So hopefully this will be of use to you, and take care.